Natalie Reed had barely turned off the engine of her sleek black SUV when she noticed the first indication of trouble. She had chosen this quiet suburban neighborhood in Willow Creek for its promise of tranquility, a stark contrast to the high-stakes chaos she had left behind in her career. The moving van was still an hour away, her boxes untouched, but already 2 figures stood at the edge of her new property, observing her with thinly veiled suspicion. The woman, a tall figure in her late 40s with sharp features and a pristine white blouse, adjusted her designer sunglasses as she scrutinized Natalie's vehicle. Beside her, a man in his early 50s, broad-shouldered and sporting a faded baseball cap, shifted his weight, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his khaki shorts. Their posture suggested authority, or at least a self-assigned version of it. Natalie exhaled quietly, stepping out of her car. She smoothed the front of her tailored jacket, a reflex from years of professional habit, though she had opted for a more relaxed look today. Dark slacks and a crisp linen shirt. The woman wasted no time. "Excuse me," she called, her voice clipped and carrying an edge of entitlement that Natalie recognized instantly from past encounters with petty bureaucrats. "I'm Evelyn Carter. This is James Holt. We represent the Willow Creek Community Alliance." Her tone implied that the title carried weight, though Natalie already knew from her pre-move research that the Alliance was little more than an informal group of residents with no official standing. Natalie turned fully to face them, offering a measured nod. "Natalie Reed, pleasure to meet you." Her voice was calm, professional, betraying none of the irritation she felt brewing beneath the surface. James stepped forward, tilting his head as if appraising her. "We like to welcome newcomers personally," he said, his gravelly voice tinged with a hint of condescension. "Make sure they understand how things work around here." He adjusted his cap, a gesture meant to assert dominance, though it only made him appear more comical in Natalie's eyes. Evelyn folded her arms, her gaze sweeping over Natalie's attire and the car behind her. "This is a tight-knit community," she added. "We have expectations, standards to keep Willow Creek the way it's always been. I assume you're aware of that." Natalie maintained her neutral expression. She had reviewed the neighborhood's guidelines, such as they were, before signing the lease. The Community Alliance had no legal authority. Its rules were suggestions at best, enforced only through social pressure and bluster. "I've done my homework," she replied evenly. "I understand the Alliance is optional." Evelyn's lips twitched, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before she masked it with a tight smile. "Optional? Yes, but strongly encouraged. We take pride in our neighborhood's appearance and safety." The emphasis on safety carried an unspoken implication, one Natalie had heard too often in her line of work. "I appreciate the sentiment," Natalie said, keeping her tone polite but firm. "I'll manage my property according to my own standards. Thank you for the introduction." She turned slightly, signaling her intent to end the conversation. But James wasn't ready to let it go. "You're new here, Ms. Reed," he said, stepping closer, his shadow falling across the driveway. "What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?" His question was casual, but his eyes betrayed his true intent. To categorize her, to determine whether she was a threat to their carefully curated order. Natalie paused, meeting his gaze. She could sense Evelyn leaning in slightly, eager for the answer. "Why does that matter?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with a subtle challenge. Evelyn huffed, as if the question itself were absurd. "We like to know who's living among us," she said, "for the good of the community. Surely you understand that." Natalie allowed a brief silence to settle, letting their discomfort grow in the absence of an immediate response. Then she smiled faintly. "I work in law enforcement," she said, offering the simplest version of the truth. It was enough to throw them off balance without revealing the full scope of her background. James blinked, caught off guard, while Evelyn's smile faltered. "Law enforcement," she repeated, her tone less certain now. "Well, that's interesting." "Very," Natalie agreed, her expression unchanging. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a move to oversee." She stepped toward her front door, but Evelyn recovered quickly, her voice rising slightly. "Before you go," she said, "you should know we have specific guidelines about exterior upkeep. Your driveway, for instance, it's already showing oil stains. That's not acceptable here." Natalie glanced back at the pristine concrete, which bore no such marks. "I just arrived," she said dryly. "The car's been parked for 5 minutes." "Even so," James interjected, puffing out his chest, "we expect prompt attention to these things. First impressions matter." Natalie tilted her head, her patience thinning, but her demeanor unshaken. "And if I don't comply with your expectations?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "We'll issue a notice," she said, as if the word carried legal weight. "And if it's ignored, there will be consequences." "Consequences," Natalie echoed, her tone light but pointed. "Such as?" James scowled, clearly unused to being questioned. "Fines," he snapped. "And if you don't pay, we'll escalate it." "To whom?" Natalie pressed, her voice steady. "The city? The police?" Evelyn's nostrils flared. "To the proper channels," she said vaguely, her confidence waning. Natalie folded her arms, her gaze shifting between them. "Let's be clear," she said, her words precise and deliberate. "The Willow Creek Community Alliance has no legal jurisdiction. You can't impose fines or enforce rules without homeowner consent, which I haven't given. If you attempt to harass me, I'll report it. Understood?" James's face reddened, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Everything okay here?" A man approached from the sidewalk, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He wore a plain jacket and jeans, but something about his bearing suggested authority. Natalie glanced at him, then back at Evelyn and James. "Just a friendly chat," she said, her tone neutral. The man nodded, turning to the pair. "You two know the Alliance doesn't have the power to stop people on public streets, right?" Evelyn stiffened. "We're ensuring community standards," she insisted. "Sure," the man said, unconvinced. "Just don't cross any lines." He gave Natalie a quick look, assessing, not unfriendly, then walked off. Evelyn and James exchanged a glance, their bravado visibly shaken. "We'll be watching," James muttered, though his voice lacked its earlier bite. "I'm sure you will," Natalie replied, her smile cool and unyielding. She watched as they retreated, their steps stiff with frustration, already whispering to each other. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. People like them didn't relinquish control easily, but neither did she, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Part 2. The Escalation. Natalie Reed stood on her front porch the following morning, cradling a steaming mug of coffee as she surveyed her new street. The air was crisp, the neighborhood quiet, save for the distant hum of a lawnmower. It was the kind of peace she had sought when she chose Willow Creek, yet she knew it wouldn't last. People like Evelyn Carter and James Holt thrived on confrontation, and her refusal to bend to their self-imposed authority had undoubtedly bruised their egos. She took a measured sip, her eyes narrowing as a white SUV with tinted windows rolled slowly past her house. Its pace was deliberate, too deliberate, and she clocked the driver's side window, lowering just enough for a glimpse of a phone camera pointed her way. She set her mug down on the railing, her lips pressing into a thin line. They weren't wasting time. The SUV circled the block and returned, parking 2 houses down. Evelyn emerged from the driver's seat, clipboard in hand, her posture rigid with purpose. James followed, adjusting his cap and scanning the street as if on official patrol. They approached her property line, stopping just short of the sidewalk, and began scribbling notes with exaggerated focus. Natalie watched, her expression unreadable. This was no casual follow-up. It was a calculated move. "Good morning," she called out, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the yard. Evelyn's head snapped up, her sunglasses glinting in the sunlight, while James squared his shoulders, clearly itching for a rematch. "Ms. Reed," Evelyn replied, her tone icy, "we've been reviewing your property. There are several violations we need to address." Natalie stepped off the porch, crossing her arms as she closed the distance between them. "Is that so? Enlighten me." Evelyn flipped a page on her clipboard with a flourish. "For starters, your mailbox is faded. It doesn't meet our aesthetic standards, and your front walkway has visible cracks, which poses a safety hazard." Natalie glanced at the mailbox, a perfectly functional steel box with minor weathering, then at the walkway, where a hairline fracture barely disrupted the surface. "Those are your concerns?" she asked, her voice tinged with dry incredulity. James stepped forward, his tone gruff. "That's just the beginning. We also noticed your recycling bin isn't properly labeled. Our guidelines require clear markings for waste sorting." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "Guidelines I haven't agreed to follow, as I made clear yesterday." Evelyn's smile was tight, almost predatory. "You may not have signed on officially, but as a resident, you're subject to community expectations. Non-compliance carries penalties." "Penalties," Natalie repeated, her gaze steady. "You mean another one of your unenforceable fines?" James smirked, folding his arms. "Call it what you want. Ignore it, and we'll take further steps. We've got connections at City Hall, a few calls, and you'll be dealing with inspections you can't dodge." Natalie let the threat hang in the air, her silence deliberate. She had faced down far more formidable opponents than these two, and their bluster was almost laughable. Almost. The problem was their persistence, their willingness to weaponize bureaucracy against anyone who defied them. She'd seen it before. Petty tyrants who preyed on the uninformed, banking on compliance through exhaustion. "Interesting," she said, finally, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Because I've got connections too. And I'm curious, how do you justify collecting fines when your alliance isn't registered as a legal entity?" Evelyn's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "We operate under implied consent," she said. "Most residents support our efforts to maintain order." "Most," Natalie echoed. "Not all, and certainly not me. Implied consent doesn't hold up in court, Ms. Carter. Neither does harassment." James bristled, taking a step closer. "You think you're untouchable because of your law enforcement gig? We've been running this neighborhood longer than you've been unpacking boxes. You don't scare us." Natalie met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't need to scare you," she said. "I just need you to stop breaking the law." Before either could retort, a new figure approached from across the street. A woman in her early 30s, petite with dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail. She carried a toddler on her hip, her expression wary but determined. "Evelyn! James!" she called, her voice firm. "Leave her alone." Evelyn turned, her irritation palpable. "This doesn't concern you, Sarah." "It does when you're harassing my neighbor," Sarah shot back, setting the child down and crossing her arms. "You pulled the same stunt with us when we moved in. Fines for nothing, threats about our fence. I'm done staying quiet." James snorted. "If you'd followed the rules, we wouldn't have had a problem." Sarah's eyes flashed. "Your rules, not the city's. I checked. You've got no right to demand money from anyone." Natalie watched the exchange, noting the shift in dynamics. Sarah's defiance was a crack in the facade Evelyn and James had built, a sign their control wasn't as absolute as they pretended. She stepped forward, her presence reinforcing Sarah's stance. "Sounds like a pattern?" she said. "How many others have you targeted?" Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. James glared at Sarah. "Mind your business, or you'll regret it." "Enough," Natalie cut in, her voice sharp now. "Threats won't work here. Walk away, or I'll make this official." The standoff stretched, tension thick in the morning air. Evelyn and James exchanged a look, their confidence visibly fraying. Finally, Evelyn snapped her clipboard shut. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low. "You're making a mistake." "I'll take my chances," Natalie replied, her tone dismissive. They retreated to their SUV, James muttering under his breath as Evelyn shot Natalie one last venomous glare. The vehicle peeled away, tires squealing faintly against the pavement. Sarah exhaled, turning to Natalie. "They're relentless," she said. "They've been bullying people here for years." Natalie nodded, her mind already working. "How many?" "Too many," Sarah said, her voice softening. "Most just pay to avoid the hassle. My husband and I did, at first. But it never stops." Natalie's expression hardened. "It stops now," she said. "I'll need names, dates, anything you've got. They're not just annoying. They're extorting people." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I'll talk to the others. They're scared, but if you're serious, they might help." "I am," Natalie said, her voice resolute. She glanced down the street where the SUV had disappeared. Evelyn and James thought they could intimidate her into submission, but they'd miscalculated. She wasn't just a new resident. She was a reckoning, and she was only getting started. Natalie Reed knew that Evelyn Carter and James Holt wouldn't retreat quietly. Their type never did. Power, even the illusion of it, was too intoxicating to surrender without a fight. By midweek, the signs of their retaliation were unmistakable. Her mailbox overflowed with official-looking notices from the Willow Creek Community Alliance, each detailing fabricated violations, unauthorized paint colors on her window trim, excessive noise from a non-existent generator, even a claim of disruptive behavior tied to her brief exchange with Sarah. The absurdity of it might have been amusing if it weren't so calculated. She collected the notices methodically, stacking them on her kitchen counter beside a growing file of evidence. Sarah had delivered as promised, quietly rallying neighbors willing to share their stories. There was Michael, a retiree who'd paid hundreds in fines for a shed that met every city code. Lauren, a single mother coerced into donating to the Alliance to avoid legal threats, and David, a young professional who'd faced relentless complaints until he sold his home at a loss. Each account painted a clear picture. Evelyn and James had turned their self-appointed roles into a lucrative scheme, exploiting fear and misinformation. Natalie's phone buzzed as she reviewed the testimonies. It was a contact from her old agency, a favor called in days earlier. "Got what you asked for?" the voice said. "Financials on Carter and Holt? Offshore accounts, unreported income from consulting fees? They've been sloppy." "Sloppy enough for a warrant?" she asked, her tone precise. "More than enough," came the reply. "IRS is already interested. Say the word, and this moves fast." Natalie smiled faintly. "Consider it said." She hung up, her plan solidifying. Confronting Evelyn and James directly had been a warning shot. Now, she'd dismantle their operation entirely. But she wanted them to see it coming, to feel the ground shift beneath them. That evening, she printed the financial records, cross-referenced them with the neighbors' statements, and prepared a package for the city attorney. She'd let the law handle the rest after one final move. The next morning, the street buzzed with unusual activity. A rented loudspeaker sat atop Evelyn and James's SUV, blaring announcements about a mandatory community meeting to address non-compliant residents. Neighbors milled about, some curious, others visibly anxious. Natalie watched from her porch, coffee in hand, as Evelyn took the makeshift stage, a folding table beside the vehicle, her voice amplified and shrill. "We've tolerated defiance long enough," she declared, gesturing toward Natalie's house. "Certain individuals think they're above our standards. That ends today. We're filing a formal petition with the city to enforce our regulations." James nodded beside her, holding up a stack of papers. "Signed by loyal residents," he added. "Proof we speak for Willow Creek." Natalie set her mug down and stepped forward, her presence drawing every eye. She carried a thick envelope, her stride calm but purposeful. "Interesting timing," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I was just about to share some paperwork of my own." Evelyn's smirk faltered. "This isn't your meeting, Ms. Reed." "No," Natalie agreed, stopping at the table's edge. "It's yours. But since you're so fond of transparency, let's make it count." She opened the envelope and handed Evelyn a single page. "Recognize this?" Evelyn scanned it, her face paling. It was a bank statement, one of the offshore accounts her contact had uncovered, with deposits matching the dates of fines collected from neighbors. James leaned in, his bravado evaporating as he read over her shoulder. "What is this?" he demanded, though his voice cracked. "Evidence," Natalie said simply, "of fraud, extortion, and tax evasion. You've been pocketing money from this neighborhood for years, hiding it overseas. The city attorney has the full file. So does the IRS." The crowd stirred, whispers turning to gasps. Evelyn clutched the paper, her hands trembling. "This is a lie," she stammered. "You fabricated this." Natalie tilted her head. "Then explain the signatures," she said, pulling another document from the envelope, a list of transactions tied to their names, corroborated by public records. "Or the complaints from your own loyal residents, who've been waiting for someone to stop you." Sarah stepped forward from the crowd, her voice steady. "She's right. We've got proof too. Receipts, emails, threats you sent us. It's over." James whirled on her. "You're bluffing. You can't." He stopped as sirens sounded in the distance, growing louder. 2 police cruisers rounded the corner, followed by an unmarked sedan. Officers stepped out, flanked by a suited woman carrying a briefcase, likely the city attorney's representative. Evelyn dropped the paper, her composure shattering.